Welcome to the ROI Masterclass, the podcast where vision meets strategy and bold moves create measurable results. I'm Liat Siegel, interior designer and ROI strategist with 17 years of experience. I help businesses transform properties and ideas into high-performing assets. This show is specifically for real estate investors, hospitality operators, and boutique developers who aren't afraid to take risks, challenge the status quo, and demand a return on every decision they make. Each and every week, we talk with innovators and leaders across industries about the strategies and the insights and really all the unconventional thinking that turns potential into profit every single time. If you believe that smart design, decisive leadership, and strategic risk are the keys to real ROI, you're in the exact right place. Let's dive in. Today's guest, Jason Hassenstab, is a Houston-based developer with active projects across Houston, Waco, and DFW, with a foundation in large-scale land development and infrastructure from roads and water plants to full community planning. Jason brings a strategic, ROI-driven approach to commercial and mixed-use projects. His work emphasizes aligning civil and structural design, amenities, and stakeholder strategy to create developments that deliver both community value and strong financial performance. Thank you so much for joining us, Jason. I'm so happy to have you here today.
No, very much appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into what you're doing today.
Absolutely. No, I'd love to chat a little bit about my story. So I grew up in the construction business at a very, very young age, going back to my roots in Omaha, Nebraska. My parents operated a concrete construction business. And even prior to that, my grandpa spent his entire career in the construction business, working his way up from the trades through the carpentries union and eventually becoming a project manager salary position for a local general contractor. And so I was exposed to the construction at an extremely young age, going to job sites with my dad on the weekends or after school during the week. Even when I was honestly 3-4 years old, some of my earliest memories, which I think those are commonly your earliest memories, is kind of in that maybe 4, maybe 5 range. But I do remember going to job sites, and even at that age, I knew like that's what I wanted to do in some way for the rest of my life. I love spending time with my grandpa, and as well as spending a lot of time with my dad. And so growing up, I got a lot of exposure to a lot of different types of, particularly commercial, because that was what my dad focused on in his business. And a lot of his clients were primarily in healthcare. One of them was a general contractor for a healthcare organization in Omaha and around Omaha. So there was a lot of healthcare in there. There was a good amount of self-storage that I was exposed to growing up. And then there was a lot of retail and office. So those were kind of the commercial categories that I was exposed to. And again, like even early memories was that I didn't exactly know what I didn't know. I just knew like, wow, these are like, I mean, I was always amazed by the projects I was involved in. Definitely jokes amongst the family is, I have an older brother, and, he would joke about how I was just going and playing in the dirt piles while he was working and actually doing work. And that's fine. I can take that. But that was just kind of precursor to me eventually, doing actual labor work, which is something that my dad exposed my brother and I both to. Extremely grateful for that experience growing up. And then around high school, I wanted to learn more of called the administrative sides of what my parents were doing and what the business was. And so my dad taught me how to estimate. And so I started learning how to take quantities off of plan sheets and learning how to read plans. So I would say I was probably even 11 or 12 the first time he kind of showed me how to do it. And then I was actually pretty well actively doing that for him, or quite a bit of it for him, probably starting around 14 or 15. So again, I was already on a track where like I knew I wanted to be involved in the business. And so I wanted to learn as much as anybody would teach me, in this case, my dad. And so got into college. I ended up getting my degree in construction engineering. While I was working, my first year in college, I applied for an internship with a company called Kiewit, which is a very large general contractor, a fantastic organization. And I applied for it after my first semester in college. I didn't really think I was going to get it. It was kind of just kind of do the process and, I'll apply next year or whatever if I didn't get it. Well, I interviewed that spring for what was a summer internship. I got it, and thereafter did my first internship with Kiewit, and then I ended up spending the next 14 years working for the company from that start as an intern all the way up through project manager level. And that took me to Southern California, took me to Hawaii from there. But one of the reasons that I chose to go to Southern California, I guess one thing was my now wife was there. So that was one reason. But the other reason is I wanted to get involved in some very large scale infrastructure projects. And those don't exist too often in the state of Nebraska. And so California, there's many large infrastructure projects happening at any given time in the state of California. And so I went out there and that's what I did for Kiewit for over a decade. Is I did bridge projects, underground utilities, pump stations, power plants. I was exposed to all kinds of infrastructure and really enjoyed the work. And back in 2016, just from the entrepreneurial side, I grew up in the business, and even my grandparents on both sides were involved in real estate. Buying, selling land, selling single family homes and rentals, things like that, which always had an intrigue and also had a tie to construction and the things that I did. And so my wife and I moved to Texas back in 2016 and Houston in 2017 and started doing infill projects and had some success there. And now a big focus for our business is land development, which really directly ties to the career that I had with Kiewit. And so now we're doing a lot of single family lot developments. A lot of homes get built in Houston and DFW and really the state of Texas in general every year. So that's what we really focus on now. And it's been treating us quite well.
You're also third generation construction real estate. That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I also grew up watching my father draw plans, taught me how to do perspective drawings, and my grandfather also was in construction. So what is that like, having grown up in that, and what kind of advantage did that give you into what you're doing today?
Well, I think kind of two-part. I mean, I loved how I grew up. I mean, I feel very fortunate that I was exposed to, as it turned out for me, something that I love doing. And it did give me an advantage because, like I said, I was doing, even the physical labor side of construction at a very young age. And I'm not saying I was super productive or efficient in comparison to a full-grown adult, but I was exposed to it. And that was the point of being exposed to it, understanding what it's like to dig a hole and put formwork in and frame something up and all kinds of other miscellaneous things that I was able to do with that background. But then, coming into high school and already having a working knowledge of estimating work, putting budgets together, understanding, profits and losses and how you put, like, that was, most of my peers didn't get that exposure to stuff like that. And so even as I was coming and backing up to when I explained that I didn't expect to get that internship that turned into, almost 14-year career with a great company. Well, one of the reasons was because the guy I interviewed with had a very identical background as me. He grew up in his family business that was a dirt work business. And so there was some relation there. He kind of was seeing something in himself. This kid has a background and he grew up in the business. He could certainly be a valuable piece to our organization. And so I got that internship. And so there's an example of, I don't know that I would have gotten that at least the first summer, because, that was just my freshman year in college. I more likely maybe would have got it a year or two later, but I probably wouldn't have got it then because I already had a background in doing the things that I had done.
I mean, it's so wonderful that you had all these pieces. I mean, estimating on its own is a whole thing, not to mention construction and all the other pieces that come into property development. And you were able to kind of dabble and also get trained, not just, on a macro level, but on a micro day-to-day level in each individual thing and really get acquainted with it. How do you feel that your background in building projects and building out land, how does any of that affect ROI?
The first thing that comes to mind is some of it. I think I may have been fortunate enough just through that generational component that I can visualize the projects pretty clearly just from a set of plans, and I can visualize what they're going to look like in 3D. And from that, it allows me to pretty quickly assess some of the traps in a project, whether the way the project is laid out, the way you're going to access the project, and how that can impact your efficiencies and productivity. So that those initial abilities to kind of assess something without it having to be physically built yet helps me to leverage those senses to increase ROI. And then I think another thing that was trained into me as a very young man, but even through my career with Kiewit, is an attention to the details and the costs, and really zeroing in on the biggest opportunities, because you can get into the details and into the weeds sometimes, but you're not going to get a big return on digging into some of those weeds. Focusing on those higher dollar, pieces of a project is where you're typically going to find opportunities to increase ROI. And that varies by project type too. It depends on what kind of project you're building, that you're going to focus on different things.
What are those bigger opportunity levers to drive ROI?
I can give a couple examples, but one of the examples that we look at when we're looking at just a land development component is we're looking at what kind of density we can achieve initially, but we're also looking at, does that make sense for the area that we're in? And so there is a balance to be had there. Adding density doesn't always generate the ROI that you expect. You may be better off looking at a lower density product that'll have a higher overall return. Now, specifically, when you look at a land development project, it's everything in the ground that typically is and can be costly, because it's not uncommon to put a bucket in the ground and find things that were not supposed to be there. So when you do find those kinds of things, that can impact ROI negatively. Doing enough due diligence on the front end to identify any potential issues is a good way to boost the ROI, for sure.
Absolutely. And also, I think in our initial conversations, we talked about also understanding the unique market, right? And understanding who are you building it for? What kind of things have you seen in your specific market that make it really unique?
And I'll because we're in a couple of markets. So I'll say in Houston, one of the unique things, and it's not just unique to Houston, but it is on scale, is that in Houston, we have MUD districts, municipal utility districts. Again, it is a tool that exists in other states across the country in various forms. And it is also used in other areas of Texas, but Houston is uniquely MUD centric. And that's one of the reasons that Houston has expanded so rapidly in its existence, is the ability of MUDs to bring the necessary public funds to a new area and allow for that growth to happen in a very rapid way. And so it's definitely is a unique Houston thing, although we're starting to see MUDs become more prevalent in some of the other major markets in Texas. You're starting to see more of it in DFW. Previously, Austin really didn't have any at all, and now there's quite a few coming to Austin. And even some of the smaller markets in Texas are starting to see more of that happening and spreading. But again, uniquely Houston, because a large portion of the suburban area of Houston was developed utilizing municipal utility districts.
So they're really making it friendly for land development and growth in these areas. And absolutely. I mean, all the red tape, right? And permitting and all of that. It really can limit and drop ROI.
Absolutely. Yeah. The cost of regulation is notoriously made it more costly for the development, which ultimately is passed on to the consumer in various forms. So yeah. No question about it.
So when you're developing these properties, what kind of amenities or strategic plans in place are you seeing make the biggest impact?
That varies. If we're looking at the entry level, amenities may not be as plentiful. For example, there might be a dog park. There might be a couple of pocket parks spread throughout a community. Not surprisingly, we are starting to see the prevalence of pickleball courts. Those are popping up everywhere. And I just recently tried it myself and had a good time. So So that's good. But the nice thing about pickleball court is it's less than half the size of a traditional tennis court. So it doesn't take up as much room, but it's still obviously very, very popular. So that would be kind of at that lower level. If we're looking at a BTR, a built to rent single family community, it depends a little bit on the area, but commonly the institutional groups that are in that space, some will adamantly not want too many amenities. And then some are the opposite, where they do want more amenities. They want the clubhouse, they want the pool, they want the parks along with that, pickleball. I mean, just kind of runs the gamut. So typically what we're doing is we're working with individual groups to kind of outline what their vision is of the community itself. And so, like I said, we've had some that just, no amenities requested or needed, and then others that are a little heavier on the amenities.
We spoke about before how an amenity like a pool could be really great and have somebody, a buyer or a renter, want to specifically choose that property over another. But how does that weigh in terms of maintenance costs and ongoing costs related to that? Is it something that is worthwhile because it will have enough of an ROI, or does the ongoing maintenance cost outweigh having that amenity?
I would say it's actually not as much the maintenance. It's actually, particularly with a pool, for example, the pool is more on the insurance side. It's the liability piece that is typically the groups that are saying they don't want the pool. It's more because of the liability rather than the cost itself. I think generally speaking, the maintenance of a pool on a monthly is not too costly. It's more that every 10 years that you have to drain it, reline it, that kind of stuff. That maintenance can be costly. And that kind of goes along with the notion of when you're looking at a property and you're looking at the age of a roof, that kind of falls into that similar category. But yeah, typically it functions as liability or risk averse to the liability versus they're not as concerned about the liability. Rather, they just want that amenity for future residents once they get leased up.
Do you think it's worth it, not worth it, or is it just kind of depends on the circumstance?
I think it's situational and it is location, because some of these, particularly the rental communities that are further out, they might want those amenities to attract people to come further out. So there's a strategic component. Whereas if it's closer in and it's closer to other things, activities and things that residents can get to, like even a pool at the gym or other areas around them. That's kind of the separation, is that further out, you might be inclined to put the pool in specifically because it will attract, because they're not close enough into other amenities.
You've mentioned the challenge of aligning city requirements, investor expectations, and like actual market demand. How do you balance all of those things? Like they're kind of competing priorities. So how do you balance all that trifecta?
One of the things we have been doing in recent years is we are focusing. And I'll say Houston is pretty notoriously known for a giant city that does not have zoning. Now, while Houston doesn't have zoning, there are other restricted things that act as kind of a pseudo zoning. There's height requirements and some other things, parking requirements that you have to contend with when you're designing and developing a property in the city of Houston. I would say as a general statement, it's quite friendly to development in the city of Houston and the broader Houston metro area. But we typically are going to focus on areas in the Houston metro and other parts of Texas that we're in, on locations that are less restrictive and more market driven, because we're utilizing the market data to tell us what's the most appropriate for that particular marketplace. So if entry level makes the most sense for that location, great. If a move up makes more sense, or a higher end product, then kind of make that adjustment, not in accordance with local zoning, rather with market demands. And so that's one way that we kind of work around that. And that's in part from some experience, or not some great experience, working with a city or municipality that was not friendly to what we're trying to do. So
try building in New York. It's like
I don't envy anyone doing it. And all the kudos to the people in New York that are doing what they do. I mean, I hear the stories. Used to have some friends that worked for Kiewit in New York, and those stories were pretty interesting stories to hear, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you work with, other people within the development, like designers or architects, how do you help ensure that it is ROI driven and that you don't have to kind of, revalue engineer all over again when you get to the end of a design plan?
I mean, that's a huge component. The team we have is the reason we're able to have success in ROI. There's no question about that. Our engineers, our architects, civil engineers, and structural engineers both. I mean, depending on exactly what we're doing. But on the land development side, it particularly is a focus, I'll say, in Houston, and this can vary from region to region, but we have detention. It floods in Houston and the Houston metro. So we have detention for good reason, of course. And so designing that both with ROI in mind, but also the ROI kind of is twofold. There's a direct cost to the construction, but there's also your ability to try to utilize that detention as a feature to your development. That's something that we're looking a lot more and harder at, is to incorporate that not as a hole in the ground that holds water, but how do we make that a feature of the community and make it, in this case, just as an example, placing the park or the parks at the edge of the pond, putting an aerator in it so it has a fountain, putting a path around the perimeter of the pond. So you actually see a lot of that in Houston, a lot of the communities, even the smaller ones up to the big master plan communities. And I can really say that for DFW as well, is that there's a lot of thoughtfulness put into utilizing what could just be considered an eyesore, but turning it into an amenity, really. And that's what people are looking for, is, can I just walk the trail in my own neighborhood around the pond and have those things readily available? So that's a big component to, particularly on the civil engineering side, and them really thinking through what the cost implications are to the detention, particularly in Houston.
Absolutely. I think that paying attention to all the details and how everything is planned, how it's structured with ROI in mind is absolutely imperative in order to see the highest return on investment on any project. Having that data from the beginning, whether it's going through the marketing plan, understanding who you're marketing to, and really what amenities they would call them and have them want to rent or buy there, is absolutely imperative. And then, the way that the property is positioned, the way that you set it up to feature those amenities is imperative, because otherwise you do have to value engineer at the end. You do have to rework it. I don't believe that we are in a position anymore, with how competitive the landscape is, to look at and focus the design plan only on aesthetics. It has to come with the ROI in mind first. Otherwise, it's really not impactful.
And that ROI can be, there's the dollar ROI. In this case, I'll call it a community ROI, is by being able to take what we need to meet the requirements in order to control floods, by then turning that into an amenity, it kind of becomes a win-win, because now you've got a dollar value ROI associated, or a return on that investment, but then you got a community ROI, because now it's more appealing. It does have an aesthetic to it if you plan it right and you think it through all the way through. So, yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of trends right now in the markets you're in?
What we are seeing is, particularly on, I'll say, the residential side, it's definitely been that, I'll call it kind of the modern farmhouse style that's still trending. The color components as well. That's on the residential side. On the commercial side, when we're doing our like office condo projects, those projects are nice because it caters to the small local business. And mostly what we're doing there is nice brick and stone exteriors, but particularly lighter colors, more of the whitewash look on the brick. That's definitely been trending quite a bit, in kind of cream colored stones.
Yes, warm tones.
That's been more prevalent. And we're also incorporating, which I really like in the design, combining that with wood elements, particularly like cedar wood elements. So you've got the lighter brick with a red cedar, and then in this case, we're also putting matte black steel roofs on these structures too. So that kind of those contrasting colors, but also contrasting materials. Yeah, it's gonna look fantastic. I mean, we're gonna be finishing one of those projects up here in a couple of months, and it's gonna look great.
Warm tones are totally in. There's a lot of people that still feel like gray is still the way to go, but it's not. Just PSA that this is grays out.
And I like the blues and greens that have come about in the last couple of years, even mixing hardware in, like with gold hardware like that. We've done that a little bit, and I like the look of it. Gives it a bit more of I call it a classic look. I don't know what you might call it, but I like the way it looks. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Bringing a little color in is also important. It really depends though on if it's going to be a rental, because you really want, or somebody's going to come buy a home, because you have to create this kind of blank canvas for them to be able to see themselves in it. So you don't want to put too much personality either, but it has to be just the right amount. So what would you say to somebody who's wanting to start land development, or somebody who's maybe struggling? What would be your advice to them?
For folks that are thinking that they would like to do land development, the first thing I would do is seek out a mentor, somebody who's done it and who has experience with it. And that's the first thing. I can't speak to all the mentors that I've had over the years, starting with within my own family, grandpas, dads. In this case, I was in the business that I'm still in. And so having that as a foundation was good for me. But even the mentors I had along the way through my career with Kiewit and then after. But that's the first thing. You find a mentor, somebody who's doing it, and reach out to them and start really getting that guidance. So that'd be the first thing, because like we hear often is it's a lot better to jump forward by learning from other people's mistakes, not making the mistakes like they did, right? And so we've definitely made some mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes since we started this journey. There's a shortcut, just get a mentor, or definitely you'll shortcut a lot of things if you get a mentor. If they're struggling, if it's in land development, this would be a mentor was one component, but I think getting involved in industry events can really help spark some motivation if they're struggling, particularly in the land development space. I think that's true of really any industry though, because there's a lot of industry events, a lot of different networking events that are happening. And especially if you're in some of these major metros, like if you're in Houston, you're in Dallas. I mean, there's a dozen different events and other industry folks that you can lean on and learn from and get encouragement from within your own space, whether it's land development or anything else. And for one, I really do enjoy doing those events. Meeting people that share the same passion that I do and what I do. And I always seem to get a positive boost out of going to those events and interacting with those folks.
It's always fun to network and speak to people who are like-minded and who just see the world in the same light that you do. That's why I enjoy this podcast so much, because I get to speak to other people who are speaking the same language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So before we let you go, can you share one challenge that you faced in your career that has made an impact and made you want to leave a legacy in what you do?
There's been a lot of challenges, not a shortage of those. I would say that one of the challenges on a personal level was that, human nature is that we tend to flock to the shiny object. And early on, I made that mistake quite a bit, and that created a lot of its own challenges that kind of stemmed from that. And so I think really, having a bit of a narrow focus, or a very clearly defined narrow focus in what you're aiming for to get going, I think is pretty critical. And you may not know that at first, but that finding that is going to be important. I think one of the reasons that we had the challenges that we experienced when we started doing this back in 2016 is we weren't focusing on exactly the thing that we were aiming to do in the long term. So we were getting distracted with and spending time in spaces and on things that were not really driving towards the the end goal, the long goal. And ultimately you end up losing that time. And in a lot of cases, you may not enjoy it either. So then there's kind of twofold there, but really zero in on what your focus is and just avoid the shiny objects. The legacy that I'm going to create now and will continue to, with my ability to name subdivisions after my kids and streets and stuff like that. Like, that's really cool. That's a legacy that I can leave. But I think if I had focused a little heavier earlier on that long goal, knowing that's where I wanted to land in the long term, I probably would have saved a few years. It probably would have been more than a few years. So,
and gray hairs if you have any.
Well, I'm a ginger, so it just goes straight from ginger to white. There's no transition into gray. So
lucky you. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us. It's been so much fun getting to hear your story and your journey and your takeaways. If our listeners want to find you and connect, how can they do that?
They can get a hold of me at jason@elevateddevelopment.co. That's .co, not .com. Just for clarity on that one, it happens all the time. You can also give me a call at 402-639-4325.
Amazing. We'll put your information in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.